Becoming the first wife of a Yandere villain, I'm a bit panicked right now. Originally, I wasn't panicked. As long as I followed the script, I could leave the villain's home completely intact, without losing any limbs. After that, it would be his turn to pursue the pure and innocent female lead. It would only take 3 years. After 3 years, we could get a divorce. But now, I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, wishing I could bore 2 holes through it with my gaze. Damn it. How could I be pregnant after just 1 year? Mutual respect. That was the relationship between Daniel and me. That's what the book said, and that's what I did. I neither sought his concern nor did anything out of the ordinary. The book says, Daniel has many beautiful artworks at home, and his wife is the most beautiful and unique among them all, because she is the only one with warmth and life. So, I very professionally played the role of the trophy wife, until this child appeared. I always thought I was doing a great job, but if I had done well, this child would not have appeared. Daniel would not allow me to have his child. A child is his prison. Daniel was his mother's prison, the shackles that bound her for life, influenced by his mother. Daniel thought the same way. Did I reveal a flaw somewhere? Was it that bowl of porridge I cooked so poorly yesterday? But that was exactly the same as the plot in the book. I didn't do anything extra at all. What exactly went wrong? How could Daniel agree to let me carry his child? I paced back and forth anxiously, glancing at the door. My restless movements paused. Perhaps I could get rid of this child without anyone noticing. Even if Daniel found out afterward, the child would already be gone. I didn't even have time to put on makeup or dress up. I just threw on some clothes and went out. But when the door opened, it was Daniel standing at the entrance. The black coat accentuated his tall, slender figure perfectly. And combined with his striking appearance, he was a sight to behold just standing there. In fact, Daniel was more like the most perfect piece of art in his home. He met my flustered gaze and smiled gently. Where does our Caroline want to go? I stared at him and blinked slowly. I retracted my hurried steps, calmly patted the wrinkles on my clothes, and said, I saw you coming back from the 2nd floor, so I came to pick you up. Daniel walked over, took my hand, and pulled me back from the doorway. You little liar. His teasing words made my heart skip a beat, but the truth and emotions behind his words have always been hard to decipher. Daniel pulled me to sit down and asked me as usual, what did you do at home today? I don't know when it started, but Daniel began asking this question every day when he came home, so I told him everything, one by one, except for that pregnancy test. After listening, Daniel thought carefully for a moment and then said, why have you been sleeping longer and longer at noon lately? It wasn't until he mentioned it that I realized it was indeed true. I had originally thought it was just physical fatigue making me feel weak, and hadn't even considered the possibility of pregnancy. Drowsiness is probably because of the pregnancy, but I can't say that, so I just pretend to be annoyed and glare at him. It's all because of you. It's strange. In the novel, Daniel and Caroline not only had no intimate contact, but even the slightest touch would make Daniel's face turn cold. But in the year since I arrived, except for the first 2 months, every night after that, Daniel seemed like a completely different person, indulgent and pleasure-seeking. No matter how much I cried, screamed, or fought, he would only silently lick away the tears streaming from the corners of my eyes. Smiling, he effortlessly pulled me back as I tried to crawl out from under him. His demands were simply more than I could handle. Daniel was taken aback, clearly not expecting me to shift the blame onto him, but he took it all in with good grace. He smiled and patted my head, then stood up and headed toward the kitchen. What would you like to eat today? I casually named a few dishes. Daniel doesn't like having idle people around the house, only occasionally hiring a cleaning service. I don't enjoy cooking, so the task naturally fell to Daniel. Yet Daniel, who had never lifted a finger for household chores, surprisingly found joy in it. The thoughts of a Yandere are always hard to fathom. I felt the pregnancy test in my pocket, clenched it tightly in my hand, and made a decision in my heart, calling out to Daniel's retreating figure, Daniel, wait for me a moment, I need to go get something. What's wrong? Daniel didn't turn around, still focused on preparing his dish, but the slight lift in his tone let me know he was in a good mood. I watched his busy figure moving back and forth and softly said, I have a gift for you. Daniel paused his movements, turned off the stove, and looked back at me. I felt my heart race under his gaze. Go ahead, he finally said after a long pause. Be careful." He then turned back to focus on our dinner, or rather, my dinner, but I think I won't be able to eat his dinner today. I'm going to the hospital to get rid of this child. Not a moment can be wasted. If he knew that my leaving would make this dinner go to waste, he would probably feel regretful and disappointed, but compared to the dinner, what might sadden him even more is this child. My heart softened for a few seconds. When I reached the main door, I grabbed the handle and glanced down at my stomach. Stepping out of here means there's no turning back. I have to run all the way, hail a taxi, go to the hospital, and end all of this as quickly as possible. Not a single second can be wasted, because Daniel could appear behind me at any moment without warning. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The knife fell to the ground behind me, making a sharp, piercing noise. The moment the sound echoed, before I could even push the door open, I turned around and rushed toward Daniel. On the kitchen floor, dripping and trickling, was a pool of blood. Daniel held his hand in midair, lowering his gaze to watch the blood dripping from it, as if looking at a lifeless object. This lunatic. Hearing the sound, Daniel looked up and saw that I had returned. The cold, lifeless look in his eyes was gone, and he even gave me a happy smile. Almost instantly, I recalled a passage from the book. Daniel wanted to tell Luna that he hadn't meant to hurt himself. He knew that using self-harm to win her sympathy wasn't a long-term solution, but he craved the way her eyes lingered on him. So, if he could make those moments last just a little longer, Daniel didn't care what methods he had to use. I closed my eyes. I turned away with a cold expression. Leaning against the wall, Daniel watched me rummage through the cabinets with unusual delight and kindly reminded me, "Are you looking for the first aid kit, Caroline?" I took it upstairs. I stopped rummaging, didn't look at him, and got up to go upstairs. Daniel wasn't annoyed by my ignoring him. Instead, he kindly pointed me in the right direction. "It's in the nightstand on the right." The delight in his voice made me think he was about to hum a tune the next second, but when I went upstairs and opened it, it wasn't the first aid kit inside. Lying quietly were the messy little umbrellas, and a needle. The tattered little umbrellas silently accused the needle of its violence. The curtains were half drawn, allowing a sliver of sunset light to stream in, casting its glow on the disheveled bed and leaving large patches of shadow, like a puppy curled up in grievance. I sighed softly to myself. Just as I closed the drawer, a hand reached out from behind and touched my ear. My heart skipped a beat, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The familiar scent of laundry detergent, the same as the one I used, wafted over, and my heartbeat gradually slowed. Daniel was stroking my ear. As if playing with some rare treasure, the injured hand hung at my side, wrapped haphazardly in white gauze by him. Blood seeped through the gauze, growing redder and redder. His hand was too cold, piercingly icy, but his voice carried a warm laugh, neutralizing his icy body temperature, and it sent an inexplicable shiver down my spine. "Didn't Caroline say there was a gift? What is it?" "The gift is gone." I grabbed Daniel's uninjured hand and pulled him downstairs. The first aid kit was conspicuously placed on the table. He really did lie to me. I pressed him down to sit, then lowered my head to re-bandage his hand. Daniel didn't make a sound. From the moment I dragged him downstairs to sitting in the chair, he obediently stayed by my side, letting me handle him as I pleased. If only he were really this obedient. In the book, Daniel is a mad villain who doesn't deserve any sympathy. He used self-harm to gradually extinguish the sympathy the female lead, Luna, had for him, so in the end, he imprisoned Luna. Charles rescued Luna, and Daniel also escaped. A few months later, he appeared before Luna, who was already pregnant. Luna turned and ran. She didn't look back even when gunshots rang out behind her. Daniel's death in the end still didn't make Luna stop for him. The wound was bandaged, and I breathed a sigh of relief in my heart. But before that sigh of relief could fully settle, I looked up and met Daniel's smiling gaze, and so, that breath was caught in my throat once again. The plot has deviated. Daniel has fallen in love with me. "What are you doing, pregnant? Are you crazy?" A furious man in the coffee shop drew a lot of attention. I lowered my head and took a sip of milk. The man in front of me is a supporting character in the book, and like me, he is a transmigrator. We are both beings created to maintain the stability of the plot. When a world malfunctions to the point of severe distortion, we appear. The plot maintainer needs to travel into the book and play an insignificant role to ensure the stability of the story. Simon glanced at the milk in my hand. downed the coffee on the table in one gulp, and sneered, "What's there to be afraid of? It's just a dead baby." Those words finally got a reaction out of me. Watch your mouth. But this statement is true. This child is an existence that is not permitted. A child that does not exist in the plot, the world of the book will not allow him to exist. Let alone the fact that his existence would disrupt the entire storyline. As soon as he is born, he will lose his life. What on earth are you doing? If we do this, we will both be erased. Simon still couldn't believe it. Reset refers to a severe deviation in the plot, which will cause all transmigrators in this book to lose all their memories. In other words, a reset. 03, you are such an outstanding transmigrator, which is why you've reached this position. How could you be so confused now? 03 is my serial number. The more outstanding the task completion, the lower the number, Simon earnestly advised me, just as I used to advise those maintainers who chose to stay in the book world. You used to educate those youngsters back then, but what are you doing now? Even if you accompany him in this world, what about the future? When he dies, it's all over for him, but you're still alive. Our lifespans are endless, and those memories will eventually become chains that imprison only you. You can't possibly not understand this. Besides, he's just a pervert. He gritted his teeth and shook his head, looking as if he regretted everything, as though I were someone who had recklessly thrown myself into a relationship without a care in the world. Look at what he's doing now. Only the target has changed from the female lead to you. Right now, he only hurts himself. But what about later? There will be imprisonment, rape, and endless torment. He'll lock you up at home, not letting others see you and not letting you see anyone else. Is that love? It's a twisted mind mistaking possession for love. He just sees you as his property. I never thought 589 had such eloquence. If he had used it on missions, he wouldn't still be 589 by now. 589. Guess what the book travelers who got lost in the stories before were after? Rain began to fall outside the window, and someone opened an umbrella. Simon frowned impatiently. What else? For wealth and power. After speaking, he glanced at me again. And then there's someone like you, for love. Ignoring his sarcasm, I continued, I want to divorce Daniel and speed up the plot progression. That's great, of course, he said, taken aback by the sudden change of topic, pausing for a moment before adding, but how are you going to leave now? If you're not by the villain's side, he'll go crazy. I'll handle that, I said, standing up. You need to push the male and female leads to meet Daniel as soon as possible. Simon, what do you want to do? Seeing me stand up, he also stood up. Complete the main storyline. I pushed the door open and went out, with Simon following behind. He handed over a transparent umbrella. You're pregnant and still want to get caught in the rain. I looked at him with some surprise. He scratched his head, a bit helpless. We've come this far. There's no other choice. You need to get away from the antagonist as soon as possible. As long as we complete the main couple's romantic arc, it probably won't be considered a serious deviation from the plot. Once they get together and the storyline is finished, we can go back immediately. I didn't answer. Simon suddenly grew annoyed. What are you looking at? Do you want it or not? I waved my hand and finally showed the first smile of our conversation, pointing ahead with a grin as sly as a fox. No. Someone's here to pick me up. Daniel stood by the car in all black, rain falling on his transparent umbrella. Behind him were vehicles coming and going. In front of him was a dense crowd of people. Many who passed by him pretended to glance back casually. Yet his gaze remained unwaveringly fixed on me. Damn it, Simon was startled. When did he get here? Me, probably right after I sat down. Simon said casually, did you tell him you were here? Of course not. Simon's eyebrow twitched. Then I shrugged. Maybe he installed a tracking device on my phone. Holy shit. Simon stared at Daniel for a while, then shifted a little closer to me and whispered, why is he smiling at me like that? I whispered back just like him. Probably because you're too close to me. Daniel walked over, smiled at me first, then closed his umbrella and stood beside me. Only then did he turn to look at Simon, his gaze lingering on the umbrella in Simon's hand for a few seconds before extending a hand. Hello, Daniel, Caroline's husband. Simon shook Daniel's hand. I've heard a lot about you, Simon, Caroline's. Simon paused for a moment before finding a more suitable word. Old friend, old friend. Daniel withdrew his hand. Repeating the word a few times in his mind, it didn't stir any particular feeling, except for the urge to drag the man who claimed to be his wife's old friend away from Caroline and tear him apart. The smile in his eyes faded slightly, and so, even after returning home, Daniel was still mulling over those two words. We both spoke at the same time, old friends. From when, Daniel, let's get a divorce. Daniel fell silent at once, and the only sound in the vast room was the ticking of the clock. I suppose Daniel doesn't want to know the answer to that question now, so I didn't speak up. You know, Daniel said in his usual tone, I won't agree to it. I smiled helplessly. I thought so too. Daniel's expression instantly turned cold. He usually wears a gentle smile like a mask, and even now, as he cooled off, he maintained his composure, like a jade-faced demon. I let my imagination run wild in my mind. He glanced at me twice and headed upstairs. Unwilling to engage further in this topic with me, but halfway up, he stopped again. He turned back, took a few steps toward me, and with a stern expression, pulled me along as he continued upstairs. He walked slowly, even turning back to tell me, be careful on the stairs. Despite his expression being cold and unpleasant, he led me to the study and handed me a document. It was clearly written as a divorce agreement. My heart skipped a beat, and I frowned slightly. He had actually found it. Daniel knows far more than I had anticipated, but I remember hiding it very discreetly. Then it occurred to me that he happened to arrive just when I discovered I was pregnant, including those tattered and blatantly displayed little umbrellas. On the day I found out I was pregnant, Daniel appeared calm and unhurried, but now, thinking back carefully, he came in a rush, and his clothes were slightly disheveled, which was almost unheard of before. His tone was not as relaxed and casual as usual. It was as if he had been watching me all along, so he came specifically to intercept me. It's just that I was too panicked at the time to notice these details. I glanced at the divorce agreement. How did you find it? Daniel opened it and slowly read. Caroline is so smart. Why not take a guess? The doorknob. I had checked the room before and found no surveillance devices, but after Daniel's reminder, I never expected to stumble here. Daniel smiled, his eyes crinkling as if delighted that I had guessed the answer so quickly. As expected of Caroline, he pointed at the date on the divorce agreement, frowning with a troubled expression. Isn't the date 2 years from now? Why is Caroline going back on her word? I gently rubbed my fingers. A transmigrator doesn't make rookie mistakes. Throughout history, transmigrators have always been more like outsiders in a dating simulation game, engaging in a battle of wits with the characters in the book. If I had been slightly outmatched by Daniel in the surveillance equipment incident, then this divorce agreement would be the fatal weakness I hand over to him. The Caroline in the book would never take the initiative to draft a divorce agreement, let alone set the date 2 years later. He had long known that his wife was not Caroline, yet he continued to observe quietly, interact as if nothing were amiss, and envelop me completely without leaving any room for doubt. Daniel was far more clever than I had imagined. He closed the divorce agreement and smiled lightly. So eager to leave me, he raised his hand and tore the agreement to shreds. Before I could speak the words I had prepared, Daniel covered my nose with a handkerchief. The handkerchief was laced with a sedative, carrying a pleasant fragrance. I don't want to hear Caroline speak anymore, I heard him say hazily. The moment you open your mouth, I know you're going to lie to me again, but I can't help being soft-hearted. But in the end, I thought, it would be nice to be deceived. His voice was low, tinged with a bit of sadness and helplessness, lingering in my ear. But why didn't you keep deceiving me? Money, power, self-harm, children, nothing can keep you. His voice grew distant, carrying a fragile, easily shattered grievance. Caroline, tell me, what can I use to keep you? When I opened my eyes again, what greeted me was a milky white ceiling. It was the bedroom, originally decorated in black and white, later felt too oppressive to me, so I coaxed Daniel into changing it to cream and gray. As my feet touched the floor and I walked, there was always a strange feeling of being restrained and confined. I looked down. A few thin red threads were wrapped around my left foot, with the other end of the rope tied to the head of the bed. Even someone like me, who has seen all kinds of storms and waves, couldn't help but be stunned by this sudden and inexplicable thing. What new trick is Daniel up to this time? I tried turning the doorknob to the bedroom. It wasn't locked. Then I walked to the second-floor balcony. The balcony door was locked. but there was still a long stretch of the red rope left. A thought flashed through my mind. Holding the long red rope loosely in my hand, I slowly walked downstairs. It wasn't until I left the house and reached the outermost iron gate that the slight tugging sensation at my feet reminded me the red rope had reached its end, and the iron gate was slightly ajar, not closed at all. That thought that had been lingering in my mind was finally confirmed. Luna was locked in Daniel's old house, unable to see even a glimmer of light or the sun all day. The windows were blocked, and so was the door. Accompanying her were the sound of her own breathing and the metallic clinking of chains scraping against each other. Daniel opened the door but didn't approach Luna, standing at the doorway to ask her, "What did you do at home today?" Luna said, "I was thinking about how to escape." Daniel shook his head, and a low, amused voice came from the darkness. "Wrong answer. I returned to the master bedroom and sat on the bed." The truth is absurd and laughable. I stared at the red string wrapped several times around my feet. The weight of the red string is negligible, and it breaks with a single tug. Forget about any function of restraining people. I even have to be careful while walking, or this red string might break somewhere without anyone noticing. The red string accentuated the ankle, making the red redder and the white whiter. This is the worst and most unskilled confinement in history. Daniel showed me through his actions the most despicable and filthy thoughts he had. He also showed me through his actions that the choice to stay or leave was mine. Jack tapped his watch, looking somewhat puzzled. It was already 8 p.m. In the past, his boss would have left the moment work hours ended, and no one could stop him. Jack let out a long sigh in his heart. He didn't want to work overtime, but over the past year, the boss had been acting so unusually, arriving and leaving on time every day, that Jack had almost forgotten how he used to work even during his own wedding. The only time I took a few hours off was to get married, let alone a honeymoon. Who would have thought that 2 months after getting married, he suddenly said he wanted to take time off for a honeymoon, and from then on, he never looked back on his urgent rush to go home, although the boss was in a bad state today and made many mistakes while signing. But as an excellent secretary, these are all minor issues. The biggest problem now is that Jack has become restless. After a year without overtime, he no longer wants to return to the days when he was treated like a workhorse. Moreover, the boss is just sitting here, completely lost in thought. He didn't say others couldn't leave work either. If the boss doesn't leave work, who dares to go? Others may leave. But how could Jack dare to go? Jack is a smart secretary. He knows the reason why the boss is acting so unusually today, without changing his expression. He placed a document that the boss had signed incorrectly in front of him and said, "President Daniel, this is the last document for today." Daniel was interrupted in his thoughts, picked up the pen, and lowered his head to sign, but it was already signed. Caroline, Daniel's signing hand stopped. Jack thought to himself, "I'm such a clever little devil. Hurry home and comfort your wife, boss. Stop oppressing me, your poor subordinate." Under Jack's astonished gaze, Daniel put down his pen, clearly indicating that he had finished his work. Then he turned his gaze to Jack. Daniel's calm, unreadable expression made Jack's heart race with anxiety. Jack felt a pang of guilt in his heart. Even if he had used a little trick, it wasn't for himself. It was for the boss's wife, for his colleagues, for the company, for society, for everyone's benefit. Unexpectedly, what Daniel said was something entirely different. "I'm not sure if asking someone who's been single for 36 years about this is useful." Jack had just caught his breath, only to have it taken away again. He pushed up his glasses with an expressionless face. "Go ahead," he said. "How should I express my affection?" Jack didn't know how to say it for a moment. It wasn't that he couldn't find the words, but rather he felt that the methods suitable for the general public weren't quite right for his boss. So he offered a common but timeless piece of advice. "I think you should treat your wife with sincerity, not that your usual behavior toward her isn't sincere, but rather, you should face the one you love as your truest self." Daniel glanced down at the name, Caroline, on the contract and smiled faintly. "No one could handle that version of me." "How could that be?" Jack frowned. "If they can't even accept the most authentic version of you, then their so-called affection is merely superficial and shallow." Though it was a bit presumptuous, Jack still risked overstepping his duties to be the first to get the scoop. "Is it that your wife doesn't understand you?" Daniel glanced at Jack with a half-smile but still answered him. "She is the person who understands me best in this world." He looked down at the name on the document in his hand and murmured to himself, "Sometimes I find it strange. It's as if she can embrace every side of me, always looking at me with those same eyes, never changing, not saying a word, yet saying everything with those eyes." A hint of confusion flickered in Daniel's eyes as he looked up at Jack. "I want to keep her by my side, but she insists on leaving." Daniel was the most scheming person Jack had ever encountered. His mind was more twisted than a labyrinth with 18 turns. Jack had dealt with countless difficult clients and always managed to win them over, but his own boss was by far the most cunning and hardest to handle. It's not that no one else is as gentle and refined as he is, but those are just masks. Jack can't help but wonder if Daniel's mask is permanently fused to his face. Everyone says that Charles, the young master of the Chu family, is about to cause a major stir in the business world. But in Jack's view, Charles is still a step behind his own boss. Because Charles is inherently kind-hearted, with a pure corner in his soul. To put it more bluntly, his moral bottom line is far higher than that of his own boss. Not that his own boss is some kind of deranged madman, but he is a businessman through and through. Yet now, this man who is even more scheming than Charles, looked up with a bewildered expression, his eyes filled with confusion and pain, asking his 36-year-old single self how to obtain love, so eager to seek an answer. "I can't be sure." Jack finally didn't dare to give a definitive answer to his boss, afraid that he might lead his boss down the wrong path. "But I think the most fundamental way to gain sincerity is to exchange it with sincerity. Perhaps you could have a good talk with your wife." Daniel listened, lowered his head in thought for a moment, and then replied, "Thank you for your advice." Jack somehow felt a sense of relief. As even handling multi-million-dollar projects had never made him feel so burdened, he shook his head and said it was what he should do. After saying that, he added one more sentence, "Wishing you success." Daniel smiled and nodded at him. "Thank you. If there's a chance." Jack watched Daniel get up and get dressed, knowing it was time to clock out. Before leaving, Jack turned back, adjusted his glasses, and corrected him seriously. "President Daniel, it's 35 years. I haven't turned 36 yet." Daniel paused for a moment, buttoned his coat, and smiled. "All right, I'll remember that." The signal 589 was received in the mind, the same restless voice. "The male and female leads have had their 10th encounter with the antagonist. Normal, normal, everything is normal. The antagonist has not developed romantic feelings for the female lead, nor has he shown her any special favor. The plot judgment is completely normal. So there hasn't been any major deviation from the plot." 589 asked in confusion at the end. "What's going on? Does that mean there's no antagonist in this world anymore?" I closed the communication. The communication in my mind only appears when the plot progresses beyond 80%, and its appearance also tells me that even though Daniel hasn't appeared in front of me for a long time, the plot has been moving forward all along. That's right. It's been a month since Daniel imprisoned me here, and he has never once come. I feel a headache coming on. In my previous world, I wasn't unfamiliar with Yanderas, but I've never encountered one like this. He locks someone up at home and then ignores them. Meals are delivered every day, but the person who should be here doesn't even dare to show his face. A month has passed, and the baby in my belly is already 3 months old. As the pregnancy becomes more noticeable, it will become increasingly inconvenient to move around later on. I finally made a decision in my heart. If Daniel doesn't come to find me, I will go to him. But who would have thought that the person I had been longing for day and night would actually appear that very evening, covered in the smell of alcohol. The first thing he said was an apology, then he sent me away from his side and went upstairs to take a shower by himself, not letting me get even a hint of the alcohol smell. By the time he came out again, he was mostly sober. I sat on the sofa watching, patting the spot beside me. He moved, but sat on the floor, nestling against my legs, burying his head in my skirt, like a drowned dog. "Why are you apologizing?" I pinched his ear. "I've been drinking." His voice was slurred, as if still soaked in alcohol. I then asked, "And why did you drink?" He hesitated for a moment but still answered me, "I had to drink to dare see you." Then he gently rubbed his head against my thigh and whispered softly, "I missed you so much." I feel a bit choked up. Seeing Daniel like this makes me uncomfortable, but what I gave him was meant to bring about change, so even if it's difficult, we must grit our teeth and move forward. "Daniel, what do you want?" Daniel was pretending to be drunk, but the moment he saw Caroline, he sobered up. Daniel was putting on a difficult act. But he couldn't even tell whether he was genuinely uncomfortable anymore. More importantly, he just wanted to soften Caroline's heart and avoid her gaze, not wanting to look up and see the fear and disgust in her eyes. Maybe he was still a little drunk, so when Caroline asked that question, he almost blurted out "you," without thinking. He almost reached out but then withdrew. He didn't just want Caroline, he was greedy. He wanted Caroline's gaze, her looks, her smiles, her hugs, her kisses. And her love. He wanted it all. Daniel didn't quite understand what Jack meant by original self and sincerity for sincerity, because from beginning to end, Daniel has always been Daniel in front of Caroline. Jack thought Daniel had always been wearing a mask, but he wasn't. Perhaps he did in the past, but he put it on when he was too young, and by the time he grew up, he couldn't take it off anymore. So it can't be considered a mask. At most, it's just human skin. If Daniel's inner self were divided into 10 levels, Jack saw Daniel at level 3, while Caroline saw him at level 5. It wasn't that Daniel didn't want Caroline to know the truest version of him, it was that he was afraid. Even Daniel himself detested that part of him, yet, while he detested it, he couldn't help but want to set it free, because only he would dare to harden his heart and keep Caroline by his side. So it was the 9th level version of him who imprisoned Caroline in the house with a red rope. But what puzzled Daniel was that Caroline saw right through him. She knew the secrets in his heart and was aware of the so-called 10 levels, yet she didn't seem to care, as if the 1st level Daniel and the 10th level Daniel were the same person, and it made no difference to her, because she only knew one Daniel. So there was greed, so there was reluctance to let go, so there was baseness. As long as she could be kept, but in the end, he still gave her a choice. That was not a decision made by the 10th level, it was a decision forced upon the 10th rank by all the other ranks. If she wants to leave, then let her go, that's what he said. But the moment Daniel stepped out the door, he began to regret it. God only knows what immense willpower it took for him not to turn back and truly lock Caroline by his side. But Daniel didn't look back. He knew himself too well. If he turned back even once, all his seemingly noble actions would turn to nothing. Whether Caroline was about to leave or had already left, it would render all his previous endurance futile. Daniel couldn't bear to watch Caroline leave, nor could he face the empty house, so he never set foot in the house again. As for the meals delivered daily at fixed times, it was merely a desperate attempt. Perhaps Caroline might choose to stay at home, even if the probability is slim. But she was really there, she was actually there, yet the fear in his heart did not lessen in the slightest. He was afraid she would leave again, even though Caroline had never left his side, even though she had always stayed by him no matter the circumstances. Daniel was still filled with anxiety and unease. Caroline is elusive, Caroline isn't even Caroline, but Caroline is his Caroline. You can't hold on to her. She will leave, she might vanish at any moment. Daniel is despicable, cunning, and vile. With a filthy mind, since I am trapped in hell for eternity, could you sit in heaven and occasionally bestow upon me your gaze and love? Daniel thought to himself. She asked herself what she wanted. I want you to stay, I want you to stay. I smiled, bent down, lifted his face with my fingers, and kissed the corner of his mouth, agreeing. Okay. Daniel stared at me like a little fool, his gaze vacant. I laughed even harder. He snapped back to reality and asked several times, "What did you say?" I stopped laughing, held his hand, and said to him, "Daniel, you're a pervert." His face instantly changed color. I didn't let him escape, firmly held his hand, and continued, "But you're not just a pervert, you've received a good education, you know the rules of society, you understand what's right and what's wrong, what should be done and what shouldn't, most importantly, you have sincere love to me, so whatever you want, tell me. Don't keep everything bottled up inside. Ask me, demand of me. Command me, beg me, as long as I can agree, I will definitely fulfill your wishes." Daniel's gaze was dazed as he looked into my pupils. "But this way, I might end up hurting you." "No," I said firmly, holding his hand with a resolute gaze. "Daniel is the most wonderful existence in this world, and Daniel would never want Caroline to suffer. I know him better than he knows himself in this regard." The 5th month of pregnancy. Plot completion at 98%. 589's voice finally sounded a bit calmer. Wait quietly for 2 more months. Once the female lead is 3 months pregnant, we can leave. The female lead is 3 months pregnant, which is the point in the original book where Daniel dies. The book is finished. I turned off the communication in my mind and let out a sigh. The sound of the door opening signaled Daniel's return. I glanced at the time. Daniel was coming back earlier and earlier. As soon as he saw me, he smiled and asked, "What did you do at home today?" I still told him everything, one by one. The red string on my foot had long been removed, but I thought it looked nice, so I later asked Daniel to tie it back on my foot for another day. Daniel said I could do as I pleased, but he always had a special fondness for that rope in bed. I waved my hand, signaling him to come over. As he approached, I stood on my toes and gave him a kiss. He froze for a moment. Then a smile spilled from his eyes and exaggeratedly spread across his entire face. Soon, he took control of the kiss. There are still 2 months left, I thought to myself. The last night, because of the pregnancy, I'd become especially sleepy, and the communication in my mind interrupted my sweet dream. The original story's villain death node has passed. 03, you can leave now, it's still daytime. And Daniel is still at the company. Originally, he wanted to move his work home. But I firmly refused. I should have agreed to it. I'll stall the main plot for you. You wait for him to come back. We both fell silent for a moment, but unexpectedly, it was 589 who broke the stalemate. Aren't you? Don't you hate him? I was surprised. 589 interrupted me, his voice unusually cold. I hate those who ruin the plot. Besides, if I don't let you say goodbye to him, what if the villain goes crazy again and destroys the ending we worked so hard to achieve? Moreover, 589 muttered quietly, you were already planning to. I touched my stomach and sincerely thanked 589 in my mind. Thank you. His voice disappeared for a moment before he said coldly, no need. Then he ended the communication. In the evening, when Daniel returned, I lay in his arms and fell asleep. He was reading a story to lull me to sleep, while also doing prenatal education for the baby. I love you. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I interrupted him. He froze for a moment. With my eyes closed, I lifted it a little. I kissed his lips and said, I love you. Then I kissed his lips again. My eyes opened slightly from the immense drowsiness, teary and blurred. Everything in front of me was hazy. Daniel turned into a block of wood, not even blinking his eyes. He just stared at me blankly like that. To be honest, being stared at like that would usually feel unsettling. But all I felt in my heart was sorrow and heartache. My eyes hurt, as if tears were about to fall. And then my heart began to ache along with them. To suppress the inner pain, I smiled at Daniel and repeated, I love you. Then I leaned down and kissed his heart. So Daniel, tears slid from my eyes as I smiled at him. No matter who you are, I love you. So don't be afraid, my love. You can be brave. You can be confident. This is what I hope my love brings you. Even if I disappear, there's no need to be afraid. I will be back. Daniel always felt uneasy. On the night Caroline kept confessing through her tears, her love made his chest swell, as if filled with warm, soft cotton, but her tears left him at a loss. Caroline cried for a while and then fell asleep from exhaustion, but Daniel kept watching her. He didn't dare to sleep. Caroline's belly grew bigger and bigger, and at the same time, the panic in Daniel's heart grew deeper. Caroline's belly gave birth to a little one. Just thinking about it made her tremble. Caroline is so small. What kind of pain would she have to endure to give birth to this child? What kind of torment would she go through to return safely to my side? What if something unexpected happens? What about the child? What about Caroline's parents? What about all the places she still wants to see? What about the story she didn't finish reading yesterday? What about me? What should I do? No wonder my mother despised me back then. Because now Daniel also despises the incompetent and greedy me. Tonight, Caroline made me feel as if I had been struck by a perfect life falling from the sky, a kind of illusory completeness, but there is also unease. So he wanted to stay by her side, waiting until daybreak, so that she would see him first when she woke up. The first rays of the morning sun shone on Daniel's bloodshot eyes, startling him into realizing that the next day had already arrived. Caroline woke up and, seeing Daniel sitting by her bedside, exclaimed in surprise, Daniel, have you been sitting here all night? "What's wrong with you?" In that instant, Daniel felt as if all the blood in his body had frozen, as if he were standing on the edge of an abyss. He swallowed the metallic taste in his mouth, clenching his teeth tightly. It wasn't her, not his Caroline. His Caroline was gone. The so-called plot maintainer refers to someone who ensures the story's plot progresses smoothly as intended. As long as it's a book, there is almost always one or several maintainers. I am plot maintainer 03. When a book reaches its conclusion, the maintainer will automatically fade away. Completing our tasks is our mission. Our lives have no end and no color. We were created solely for the sake of a perfect plot. Daniel is the only color in my life. 589 said that many maintainers who chose to stay in the book out of greed ended up with bad outcomes. Because human hearts are hard to predict. But actually, I'm not here out of greed. No, it is greed. We were created, yet equipped with human brains, and thus we have emotions. Even though there are programs in our minds, we can still be called human. If before, 589 said I was an emotionless robot that only completes tasks, then Daniel is the proof that I am a human. After a long and tedious negotiation, I finally managed to use my outstanding performance as leverage to successfully negotiate the terms, exchanging it for the condition to accompany Daniel until the end of his life in this world. The child simply cannot survive under any circumstances. The main plot will not allow its existence. This is something I had anticipated. Moreover, I am incapable of being a qualified mother, accompanying Daniel in this world until the end of his life, after which I will have to leave and work day and night for hundreds of years. This is the price. Everything comes at a cost. 589 once told me that in the long years to come, or rather, in the endless cycle of tasks that can hardly be called years, I would only be able to fall asleep with memories, only to forget Daniel, whom I had loved so deeply. I didn't argue with him at the time. My memories would be archived, and the story between us would be like a TV series I could watch episode by episode. I only told him, this is the price. 3 months later, I returned to this world. I waited quietly at home for Daniel until the sun set and the sound of a car came from downstairs. I approached the window and looked at him carefully. I never imagined that 3 months could feel so long that it seemed as if my entire life would be this desolate and lonely. Daniel looked normal, too normal. I watched him enter the house. So I got up and went down to the first floor to wait for him. The front door opened. His hand, about to turn on the light, paused. The light was already on. Daniel paused for a moment as he loosened his tie, then let go completely. The tie wasn't completely removed, hanging loosely on him. He looked up and suddenly met my gaze, which had been fixed on him all along. Daniel suddenly smiled, and tears began to fall, leaning against the wall, with red eyes, his voice still sounding very calm. He asked me, "What did you do at home today?" 03 extra. "Oh, you're finally back." 589 probably just came back from completing a mission. It's not called 589 anymore, it's 515 now. I nodded to him. 515 glanced at me a few more times. "You don't look like someone who just lost her husband." Sure enough, still has a sharp tongue. I know what 515 is referring to. He said that everyone who has ever stayed in the book world and returned has, without exception, come back with a gloomy face. You, of all people, could it be that your rebellious phase, which you never had, is finally here? No matter how high he rises in rank, 589 still can't shake off his nagging habit. You went through all that trouble, and the decades you spent there were nothing more than the blink of an eye for you, yet you wasted even more time for that blink of an eye. I really don't get it. You know 05 and 07, those two are the biggest gossips. Who knows what kind of rumors they've spread about you? They just have nothing better to do. 515 was at a loss for words and had nothing more to say. He thought I was mocking them, but in reality, I was just expressing the idea that there's nothing to do, because there really is nothing to do, unlike the human world, which is so rich and diverse. When people feel stifled, they always have to find something to do to pass the long, tedious days without any tasks. We have human brains, which is why we can be called human. Initially, the upper echelons refused to install human brains in us, fearing we would be difficult to control. Later, they claimed they could program the brains, and the opposition gradually subsided. Without being human, it would be impossible to complete the tasks in the book. Without being human, we could neither understand human emotions nor empathize with them. After what I've done this time, I expect the opposition will rise again. One of the conditions they originally agreed to was the first command implanted in our minds: do not resist the leader. But this time, I not only resisted but also achieved my own goals through negotiation. Who knows if other plot maintainers might go even further in the future. But that's all for the future. I interrupted 515's incessant chatter. Next mission location. He was clearly displeased at being cut off, rolled his eyes, and without turning his head, said to me, "I'll lead you there." Following behind 515, I began to ponder about 515. If it weren't for one of the programs in my brain that prohibits romantic feelings between plot maintainers, I would almost suspect that 515 has a crush on me. It's not that I'm overthinking it, although we used to have a good relationship, ever since he found out about my involvement with Daniel. It's as if a bomb inside him was ignited. He explodes at the sight of me. Here, this is it. 515 stopped. Go through this door. I don't need to say anything more after that. I nodded and said thank you. Just as I was about to step through the door, 515 suddenly spoke from behind. The cost is so high. Why did you still choose him? I looked at the light ahead and replied, 515, if you always hesitate and overthink, you'll end up grasping nothing. I moved forward and entered a new world. After understanding this world, I almost laughed out loud. The upper class may not have human brains, but they certainly think of everything, because in this world, I'm still stuck with a Yandere, afraid I'll repeat my mistakes, looking for a chance to reset me. I followed the plot, coaxing this Yandere friend until he stormed out just as the story dictated. Only then did the expression fade from my face. I am this Yandere's lover, kept in his home. Who in their right mind would keep a lover in their actual home, preferring to storm out rather than reveal their true nature in front of her? Loving without even realizing it. No wonder there's a chasing wife to the crematorium scenario later on. I walk around the house to get familiar with its layout. While I was upstairs, I heard noises coming from downstairs. I frowned inwardly, thinking this scene shouldn't exist. As I went downstairs, it was Daniel who pushed the door open and entered. I froze in place. His temples were graying, yet he remained handsome and dashing. He smiled as soon as he saw me and asked, "What did you do at home today?" I scratched my finger with my nail, and as the stinging pain spread, he still stood at the door, smiling at me. I also smiled, slowly walked down, and stood in front of him, asking, "Why did you come over?" He lowered his head onto my shoulder and said, "You disappeared, so I came looking for you." I gently stroked his hair and asked, "I've never asked you before, but why do you always say this as soon as you come home?" He nuzzled my shoulder and replied in a hoarse voice, "I want to know everything about you." This answer is just passing, fitting Daniel's character, but I still shook my head. "No, that's wrong." Daniel froze instantly, all movement coming to a halt. Ignoring his stiffness, I pushed him away from me and looked into the eyes I had gazed upon for decades. Every question he asked was his cautious yet persistent affection. Rather than asking what I had done, it was more like he was saying, "I love you." I reached out and ruffled the hair of the person in front of me. "Got it." 515. 515's response fit Daniel's character, but it didn't match his affection for me. As I spoke, the face of the person in front of me quickly changed, transforming into that familiar 515. I invited him in and said to him, "Did the higher-up send you?" 515 seemed a bit down and responded softly with an as if remembering something. He glanced around the room again and asked, "There aren't any surveillance cameras in this house, are there?" "No." He hasn't realized yet that he likes Kathy. I poured a cup of tea for him. "Did I pass?" He glanced at the teacup but didn't take it, muttering, "You passed." "Thank you." I took the teacup back and drank it myself. I thought I acted quite convincingly. He suddenly said. I nodded. "It really is similar." If 515 didn't speak and just stood there, I would have thought I really saw Daniel. 515 opened his mouth, and I interrupted him with a smile. "What, do I need to explain this? You are similar, but you're two different people. I'm not so blind that I can't tell you apart." 515 lowered his head and said nothing more. As I saw him out, I thanked him again. Even though he came to test me, I still want to thank 515, otherwise, I wouldn't have seen him again. I thought I would have to live with memories from now on, but it's good to see him one more time. Before leaving, I asked, am I the only maintainer in this world? 515 glanced at his watch. There's one more, a newcomer. The higher-ups said to bring them to you. Mentoring newcomers is the most thankless task. I'll probably be sidelined for a long time after this. I don't like taking on newbies either, so I jokingly scolded. Even without a brain, you really can't stand to take any losses. 515 rolled his eyes. You asked for it. He'll find his own way here. Just wait, I'm leaving first. I saw 515 off. I hadn't been sitting in the house for long when the doorbell rang outside. Opening the door, I saw a boy about 15 or 16 years old. He looked dirty and as thin as a little dog, appearing to be around 12 or 13 years old. I frowned, unsure if this was another person who had transmigrated into the book. He spoke. 03. Confirmed. I nodded and let him in. Walking ahead of him, I explained the plot to him and then told him about his role. Later, you'll be the child I raised and stay by my side, but I don't want to be the child you raised. The child stopped behind, and my voice also ceased. Frowning slightly, this is why I hate bringing along newcomers. They always act according to their own preferences, and bringing a newcomer along increases the difficulty of the plot by at least half. I turned around expressionlessly. Why? Before I could finish speaking, the child in front of me smiled and said to me, how about it, Caroline? After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it.